Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, a podcast devoted to helping you overcome challenges in your life that prevent you from becoming the best version of yourself. Each episode features interviews with people from all walks of life about their journey of self-development and the principles they utilize to overcome their fears to achieve their desired outcome. Ready to be enlightened? Here's your host, Ken Primus.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As you know, it is my custom to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things very expensive in my eyes. Time. 24 hours has been afforded every single man and woman on this planet now. The thing about time, how you utilize it, how you honor her, respect her, is going to tell us a lot about your life. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It has created Brian that is before us today. And we just want to stop and honor him for coming and spending some of these precious commodity here with us at Threads of Enlightenment. Brian, thank you so much for showing up, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It is an honor, man. One of the things, as I said on the onset of the question of our podcast, is to ask you this question as to how do you serve mankind? Because as I said to you before, it is a powerful question loaded in the sense that it makes us go in and articulate what we do and what our assignment is about. What and how do you serve mankind?
Yeah, right now, my current mission, what I'm doing right now, serving mankind, is I show trauma survivors how to make a difference by sharing their stories with the world. Because I've learned that sharing our stories has the power to transform the world around us. Because we all think in stories and we relate to other people's stories. And when we do that, in a lot of ways, if you've been through trauma, you realize suddenly you're not alone in this world. And when people so often downplay their own story, they think, oh, my story's not important. It's not as bad as this other person's, or who would want to hear my story? I don't want to just go talk about myself. And it's not about any of that at all. 16 and a half, 17 years ago, I was injured by a suicide bomber in Kandahar, Afghanistan. He just about killed me, but he didn't. And I spent 14 months at a medical center, and we can get into that. But basically, I was able to get up on stage one day and have like 2 minutes that a guy threw me on his stage and pulled me up there in front of everybody. There were 3,000 people in the audience that day, and I didn't realize that was going to be the case or that I was actually going to talk. And I said, hey, I'm Brian. I got blown up. I guess I'm still here for a reason. Go for it. Worst motivational speech you probably ever heard. But a lady who had walked up to me right after I got off stage, and I'll put this story right here real quick, and then I'll leave it be. But I stepped off stage and my life changed because she walked up to me, lady in her 20s, and she said, hey, Brian, thanks for sharing. I was raped and molested as a child all throughout my teen years, as well as in my adult years. My boyfriend was abusive. He broke up with me, and 2 weeks ago I tried to kill myself but failed. And she just left it there, and I didn't know what to say to her. It's awful. But then she said at the end of that, she said, but if you can survive all that, referring to my war injury in Afghanistan, she said, if you can get through all that, if you can survive that, I think I can get through this. And that was when I realized I have to speak. And for the past 16, 17 years, I've been a keynote speaker all over, mainly North America, but also all over the world, sharing my story and the lessons I learned through my traumas. More importantly, the lessons I learned in a way that helps other people win the battles they're facing right now. And I've had a lot of people ask me, Brian, how do I do what you do? How can I share my story? How do I use my story? They don't teach you that in school or in college. Well, that's what I do now. I teach other trauma survivors how to make a difference. And yes, an income. You have to be able to make money, be productive financially with it by sharing their story and making a difference in the world.
And I love that, how you articulate that. And that's what Threads of Enlightenment is about, Brian, sharing stories. That's why I invite people here, because I want the audience, the listeners, those outside of this zone, if you will, that tune in to be alerted that, wait a minute, I listened to this particular podcast and, I'm not alone. The purpose of Threads is to let you know that you are not alone, because as Brian said, all of our stories are very, very important. It may not be that important to the other people there, Brian, the other, let's say, 10,000 people that was at your first, speech, but one. And that is the whole enchilada, as they say, that one person that came up after you and talked and gave her story. That was why you were pulled on the stage. Brian, one of our customs here is to jump in this thing called the time machine. We call it memory. And we visit some of those spaces that we reside for a short period of time. We call the first space that we live the family. We got mom and dad, a bunch of strangers. We have our brothers and sisters, maybe a bunch of strangers. And you are in this pile with a bunch of strangers. And mom and dad is now going to input data into you. All the traditions of your family, the religion, all the good stuff, if you will, the food, all that stuff, they're going to start depositing into you. What was your family unit like?
My family was, like many people's families, very dysfunctional. There was nothing healthy about it ever. And there are probably a billion other households I could have grown up in that would have been way healthier. And my parents divorced when I was 12 after some extreme traumas took place. And my mother ended up moving down to Florida. I was still in Michigan. I went to live with my father for a time. He ended up going to jail. So around the age of 12 or 13, I was living at my grandma's house, but nobody was ever home. So I was basically on my own. Nobody told me I had to go to school. Nobody told me what I had to do. There was nobody around. And so I was just had to basically grow up and do my own thing for a few years there. And so, a lot of that really, it hardened me emotionally, which isn't always a good thing, but it's not always a bad thing. It made me very street smart because of the experiences I lived out in the country when I was growing up. And after the divorce, I lived in the city. Very different experience, very different people, very different dangers. And so I got very street smart very quick. My survival instincts got definitely developed. And in a lot of ways, I think that experience early on in my preteen, early teen years actually mentally prepared me for the things I would experience in Afghanistan in the military. And actually, I think helped me get through them because I think emotionally, my early teen years were actually more difficult than the war itself, emotionally speaking.
Wow, that's a powerful story. I always say to people, Brian, that trauma that gives birth to us, if you will, it propels us into the survival mode where we have to, just basically survive. We're not focusing. We got to know how to manage that pain. It manifests in many different ways, and so, but that trauma will cause us to propel ourselves into this phase, this survival phase, if you will. And here you are. You are a young man affected by all of this dance that has been happening around you. And as you said, you began to kick into that mode in order to make sure that you survive where you are living. So as you're there, Brian, and you're looking at your life, what did you see? Did you see a future in the sense of school, or what was it that this young man with all this stuff, the turmoil around him, was looking and thinking about his life as to where does he want to go and how is he going to get there?
Well, as a teenager going through all that, I really had no foresight. I really had no vision for life. I didn't know to. I kind of lived day by day. I was surviving. And so there wasn't any huge foresight or aspiration for the future at that point. Because when you go through trauma, there is a period of time where nothing makes sense. You're sort of numb. You're trying to get your bearings and wits back about you. I mean, if you've ever been hit by a car or had or been punched by a professional boxer while goofing around at the gym, there's that momentary phase where, whoa, what the heck? Like, you don't know what's going on. Well, trauma does that to us emotionally. And we have to be able to just kind of, sit in that and let it wear off and then start moving forward again. And for me, I was never hopeless. I was never negative. I just didn't really have a vision for the future at that point in life. But I was always optimistic. I've always been an optimistic, open-minded person. If I'm still breathing, there's still things I can do. There's still something left to do. And so once I kind of deal with, thinking through whatever I went through, to an extent that I feel is adequate, I stop thinking about it so much and I start focusing on what's my next mission in life. Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? Who do I want to help? What does that look like? And I start pursuing it. Because a life without a mission is the most meaningless, miserable existence I've ever encountered. There have been a couple
Yeah.
times where I lost my sense of meaning. It was either after a trauma or it was after a massively big win where I never thought I would accomplish this much. And then there was no next mountain to climb because it's like a mountaintop syndrome. Like I never imagined I would write the 4 books I've written and get to speak.
Yeah.
Well, then I was doing that for over a decade and it was sort of tapered off, it sort of plateaued. And I'm like, okay, I've done all this for so long. What now? And I was sort of just existing. And it was great. I love what I do, but it was like, hey, there's got to be another mountain to climb now. Well, I'd never thought about what that next one would be. So there was a phase in between the realization of that and identifying that next mountain to climb. So I always have to have a mountain to climb. It's a sense of mission in life.
Yeah, one of the things I always, I remember when I was a young man heading into a organization for work and stuff like that, one of the things that I would memorize before I get into that interview was that mission statement. Because that mission statement is very important. And some of the interviewers didn't know their mission statement. And I would use that to get the job because I would tell them, if this is your mission statement, this is how I can assist you to accomplish that statement. And
Smart.
Everyone ought to have a mission statement for your life. Write it down. Look at it. As Brian states, you're going to have plateaus and you're going to stall because that's what we do. This journey is not a linear thing. It is a dance that is going to cause you sometimes to look at yourself and say, what the heck am I doing? How did I get here? And all of those different things. But it is a beautiful mess, though, that beautiful journey. So here's this young man, not sure. Did he head it directly into the military, or did he veer off somewhere else before he head into the military?
I joined the military straight out of high school. It was in 2003 that I graduated high school. And so it was post 9/11. We'd been in Afghanistan for a couple of years at that point, about a year and a half or two. And, if you remember, if anyone listening, if you're alive back then, you remember what it was like in America. Pretty much everybody was on board. Taliban was in Afghanistan claiming responsibility for 9/11 and basically saying, come and get us. And we did in a lot of ways for a long time. And unfortunately, politics 20 years later got involved too much, and we won't go there into that crapshoot. But for the time we were there, it was making a huge difference. And early on, that was something I believed in. I watched my country get attacked. I watched a bunch of not only Americans die, but a bunch of foreigners die. It was the World Trade Center, New York City, as well as the Pentagon and that plane in Pennsylvania. But it wasn't just an attack on America. These weren't just Americans being attacked. It was an attack on humanity. And that was a mission a lot of us went on to stop that from this small number of people who were trying to just, kill our families. And so, if that's not a mission, when the threat's there, I don't know what would be. And so that's what kind of pulled me in that direction right out of high school. Yeah,
I lost a friend there, Paul Gill. We grew up with each other in our youth group, and a firefighter who passed there and had some near miss with family and all that stuff. So I remember precisely where I was and what happened at that time, and I'm sure many of our listeners do as well. So you went into the military, and you're here because once you're here, they are now also a great entity that programs one. So here you are. This young man, not really been disciplined by anyone. He is street smart. And the very first thing he does is run straight into a system that is all about discipline. How did you handle it, Brian?
It really wasn't difficult to integrate into a system of discipline. I knew that our military is literally the best trained in the world, hands down, best trained. And if they're the best trained and they can do the kind of things that we've been able to do in combat, even examples of gunfights where platoons are outnumbered 10 or 15 to 1 and they win the fight. I mean, that's not normal. And so I
Yeah.
knew that, hey, I'm smart enough to look at this and go, what they're going to teach me is for a reason. And I wasn't one of those boneheaded kids that didn't want to listen to anyone, or one of those guys who says, oh, I would have joined the military, but if a drill sergeant would have yelled at me, I'd have punched him. It's like, no, he would have beat the hell out of you. Is what he would have done, you know. But I've always been open to learning. I'm a very open-minded person. I love to learn. I'm curious about everything. In fact, almost to a fault, because I feel one of my biggest personal drawbacks for myself is that I can't consume and retain information fast enough. I'm extremely hungry for information and knowledge in every area of life. So going in the military, I looked at it as an opportunity. Every little thing they taught me, every skill set, every tactic, it was another thing that made me more valuable, stronger, better as a person. But even the intangible things I didn't foresee, the discipline of having a schedule every day, learning how to lead, things, just the daily tasks, little things in your life that I was learning by default through forced experience that I didn't even realize were so beneficial. I mean, I speak for companies nowadays. I'll speak for conventions. Do you know what they tell me one of the biggest problems they have with their employees are? Showing up to work on time.
Yep.
I cannot believe that. That is, but if I didn't hear it so often, I would think they're insane, you're joking, you're lying.
Yeah.
Look, I'm still 10 minutes early every time I meet somebody, or 5 minutes early. I'm never on time. I'm before on time, because that's the real on time. And I've heard people say, look, I will hire you if you show up on time. Anyone can learn a skill. If you show up on time and you're reliable, we will either hire you or we will make a position. We'll create a position for you and pay you if you're somebody who shows up on time. And now that was a given in the military, and that's never left me. And in our world, it seems like that's apparently a huge issue in the marketplace, which is so pathetically mind-blowing. It's comical to me, but if it would be more comical if it wasn't true. But that's just an intangible thing. Hey, you show up on time. Don't ever be that guy who's 15 minutes late. I mean, if you don't hear from me and I'm 15 minutes late, you haven't heard from me, literally call 911. Like, you should seriously, something's seriously wrong. I'm either dead or unconscious. I'm that punctual. So that was an intangible, because everyone who knows me knows Brian's going to be there. And if not, we're going to know ahead of time, and we're going to know why, and it'll work out.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear that, because I'm a little old school, Brian. We used to have to be there 15 minutes before. If you were not 15 minutes, it was considered late. And so that's how I was programmed within my system and stuff in corporate America. So I was always about 15 minutes. And like I said, 15, anything after that, I feel like I've let myself down. So here you are, you went into the military, they began to train you. I hope you guys are listening to us. And I try to educate people about humans, Brian. One can listen, but I always invite my listeners to transition into becoming a hearer. The hearer is that individual that is inside, that subconscious individual. And when he hears what is being said, it'll change your life, because he's the one that you need to give permission to take the reins, if you will. A couple of the things that Brian mentioned that is very important in personal development: open-mindedness. You cannot be in a situation where you're closed-minded about things and grow. There's no way. Why? When one is open-minded, you become hungry. You become hungry for data. You want to know. You want data. And as you begin to dig and dig, you have what is called insights, revelation. You learn things that will change your life. Brian, you're in the military. You're learning all of these different things. Now they said the famous word, you are going to be deployed. What was Brian thinking? What was he at that point? He's trained. He is a soldier, if you will. What was he thinking now that he is assignment along with his mission statement, because when politicians come, the mission statement always gets a little messed up. So when you got your assignment with your mission, how was it and how did you feel?
Oh, it's time to go to work. We've been practicing this whole time. The past couple of years I've been in the military, and now it's time to get in the game and do what we've been trained to do. And so I knew a year to a year and a half, about a year ahead of time, that about when we were going, and that we definitely were. So it was no surprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked that
That's what I was
question
trained to
because
do.
I love the military guys when they answer that, and I want the audience to do, when it's showtime, it's showtime. You have to.
Well, this applies to a lot of your listeners. They've been trained.
Yeah.
They've been doing things, and when it's time to get in the game, don't be shy back. You jump into the thing and you do your thing.
Yeah.
You do what you've been trained to do.
Yeah, it becomes. I call it. I tell them conditioned response. You're trained, and before you know it, you get into a situation and you are responding to that condition without even knowing it, because one has practiced, put in the time, put in the, you've learned the nuances about things. And as you get into the game, you will continue to learn. So you're in Afghanistan, you're there, you're about your business, and you're amongst your comrades, as if you will. Being there, what did you learn about Brian being in the midst of all of that while you were there at that time?
2 life lessons. The first life lesson is that people are absolutely crazy. And I'm not even trying to be funny. People are absolutely insane. The human race, people,
oh yeah,
we're nuts. We're absolutely crazy. Whenever someone says, Brian, what's your biggest lesson you took life lesson away from Afghanistan? People are crazy. 3 words. Everyone has the potential to go absolutely insane, backwards, inside out, given the right circumstance or situation and pressure. What I learned about myself was I was a lot tougher than I thought I was. I mean, I always knew I've always been pretty confident in my abilities and pushed through a lot, and I've been through a lot, so that built that mental toughness from an early age. But it was a lot of it was harder than I thought, in different ways that I didn't expect, because I was new to the war environment. But at the same time, I think the other big lesson is anything can change at any moment in any way, and you have to adapt fast.
Yeah.
Because you can have it's like Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And then it's and in the military we have a phrase, that even the best plan goes out the window when the bullets start flying. And it does. Because you can have your perfect plan. We're going to go here, then here, then here, and this is how it's going to go. Well, until you start getting ambushed and shot at and rockets coming at you and machine gun fire, then you're fighting back, repelling that attack, winning that battle. And then after dealing with it, the battlefield may have changed a little bit. Or now, because of the timing or the casualties or whatever, now the plan has to change. And you have to add or take away things to the plan, and then still get from where you are to where you're supposed to be on top of that. And so life to me it's the big lesson there, I think, is constantly adapting to change. And sometimes I think I do it now without even thinking about it, because it's just so automatic. But you have to be able to adapt to change. Change is constant. Things will always change. It'll never be ideal. It's going to happen in ways you don't expect, to painful depths and degrees that you would probably never hope or wish upon yourself. And when it happens, you deal with it in the moment, and then you adapt and move forward, however that looks.
Critical thinking skills. One of the best things you'll ever. It's a great companion, I would tell people. Learn to think outside of the box and make the adjustment, because the adjustment is going to save your life. Here you are, Brian, you're in the mix, you're dancing with all of these stuff. Take us into that day that you talked about on the onset. All of those days when we remember always start just like any other day. And like you said, I was sitting under this guru for a while, and she said something to me that jumped out from her mouth straight into my being. She said, "Let life disturb your comfort." Talk to us about that day when life came in and disturbed your comfort, Brian. What was that like? And when, how did you begin to make those adjustments right there?
Yeah, my comfort got disturbed a little bit. It was Kandahar, Afghanistan, July 24th, 2006. It was about noon, if I recall correctly. It was probably 130 degrees outside. And I was going to Kandahar Airfield. I was the truck commander, the front passenger seat. I was sitting in of the lead vehicle of about a 15 vehicle convoy. And 2 miles from the main gate to Kandahar Airfield, a minivan came out of seemingly nowhere, totally unexpected, ran into my door and exploded. It blew up into millions and millions of pieces. And it was being
Wow.
driven by a suicide bomber. So he drove his minivan straight into my door, exploded, ended up killing only himself that day, by the way. So my my hats off to him. Mission accomplished, sort of.
Yeah.
He went out there to
Yeah.
die, and that's what he did. So he
Yeah,
injured two
yeah.
of us. Two of us got injured, but we both survived. We both recovered. I woke up laying face down in a ditch on the side of Highway 1 in Kandahar, fountain of blood pouring out of my face. My face and neck were 2nd degree burn. My hands were full thickness 3rd degree burns, and I didn't know where I was. I thought maybe, well, first thought was why would I lay down here, because I didn't remember laying down there, and secondly, I thought maybe we're in a gunfight, but then I couldn't find my weapon because it was still in the vehicle and I wasn't. And then I realized nobody's shooting at us, and I was trying to figure out, where am I? Okay, yeah, I'm in Afghanistan. Okay, what's going on? I'm looking over about, I don't know, 10 or 20 yards away. My gunner is laying there bleeding really bad, and the medic's helping him, and the vehicle's catching on fire, and I'm about probably 5 or 10 feet from that. And thankfully, no follow-on attack happened, which is typical. But yeah, it was really hot out there. The medevac helicopter got there within a half hour, which is really good timing. And the helicopter came down, and there's this thing that happens when a helicopter gets about within 50 feet of the surface of the ground. It's coming down, and there's this thing called rotor wash. It's all the wind that's kicked up by the propellers. Well, normally you take a certain posture, you take a knee, you face backwards as it's coming down, so you don't get a bunch of stuff in your face, right?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't really thinking in that moment. My head was kind of jarred. And so I'm watching the helicopter come down. We're in a desert, so what's on the ground? Lots of sand. Whoosh! I just got sandblasted right in the face. All this sand, I felt like a million knives stabbing into my burned face. And so it was one of those days when you just wake up and have a bad year. It's one of those days when nothing goes right. And I thought, oh my God, I kind of looked at the sky and I was like, kind of like the whole, like, God, like, seriously? Like, kind of a little WTF moment. Like, okay, I'm burned and bloody. This just happened. And now, whoosh, it's like really like a little insult to injury. Like, it's almost comical. It's like, seriously, like, what's going to happen next? Am I going to trip over a big rock on the way to the helicopter, or something? But yeah, I was medevac there to Kandahar Airfield, then up to Bagram, then to Landstuhl, Germany, and on to San Antonio, Texas, where I've remained for 14 months at the hospital. And the military had me from Kandahar, Afghanistan, to San Antonio, Texas in 3 days. They did an absolutely phenomenal job getting me out and keeping me alive. Every medical person that I interacted with was world class.
Wow. What a testament to the system of the government when it comes to protecting their own and making sure that people stay healthy. Here you are,
the training's good.
Yeah. You woke up the next day and you are in the hospital, and then they're going to start telling you stuff about rehab. And now rehab is going to be a little different because you have to learn a couple of things about the mind as you begin to embark on that journey that is called rehab. And I worked in a skilled nursing facility, and I remember, Brian, we had families would come to me and say to me, how long is my mom or dad going to be in this facility? And I would look at them and say, that all depends on your mom and dad. It all depends on their mindset and how they look at their situation will tell you how long they are going to be there. You woke up, you're in rehab, and they began to explain some of the things that took place. When all of it began to register, if you will, before you were in the zone, you didn't know who's who. But when it began to register, and they began to lay out for you the mission that you now have to do in order to begin to heal, How did you receive that info? And what did you say within yourself at that point in time?
Yeah, at the medical center, the whole thing is your mission is to heal and get better. And so to me, it was something they didn't need to tell me. And to me, it's like, of course, of course it is. You know, it's like I'm a runner, and like if I'm running like a 5K or something, and someone's like, "Good job, Brian, you can do it." In my head, I'm thinking, I know I can do it. You know, I don't need you like, thank you. I don't need you to tell me I can do it. Like, I wouldn't be out here doing it if I did. You know, they're being nice, but it's the inner dialogue. It's just kind of how I'm wired. But the worst part of the injury, what actually wasn't the blast, because I don't remember the explosion. But the worst part was the first night they got me into the medical center. They put me on this gurney. They strolled me into the 4th floor there, and they said they got me into the shower room and they'd get me clean and stuff. And so they had me laying on this table, and the head nurse looked at me and he said, "Hey, Sergeant Fleming, we're gonna do this as quickly as possible, so it'll be as painless as possible." And I didn't have any idea what he was talking about, but it didn't sound good. And I learned there's a process called debridement that they have to do to extreme burn victims. If you know anyone who's ever been severely burned, they've been through this absolute hell. And what happened is they have to get all that dirty, charred, burned skin off your body, get it clean and off, or you will die of infection. So at that point, him and about 2 or 3 other nurses, they all took razor blades and they started shaving and tearing and ripping all that burned, charred, bloody, burnt skin off my hands and my face and my neck, and they kept me awake through it. And so for about a half hour, I felt like I was being filleted alive, and it was absolutely horrendous. It was the worst pain you can't imagine or describe in words. And I wanted to pull away naturally, like, hey, don't do that. But in my mind, I knew if I fight them, it's just going to take longer, and they're just doing their jobs. And I have so much respect for the nurses that have to do that job. I can do infantry stuff. I can kick in doors. I can drag out terrorists. I can shoot at people. having to skin somebody alive to save their life for their own good and inflict that pain on them, I can't imagine just mentally how you have to prepare for that and just deal with it. But I'm so grateful for the ones who did what they had to do. They kept me alive. And so as far as rehab, I had skin grafts. They took skin from my legs and put it on my hands because they were full thickness 3rd-degree burns, and I couldn't make a fist. I couldn't do anything more than bending my fingers just a little bit. So my whole hand was open and stiff. So I had to go through several months of rehab, little by little, just, bending my fingers down a little bit more, until I could finally make a full fist and I could move full range of motion in my hands again. And that was, the extent of the physical rehab. In addition to that, I had, headaches every day, short-term memory issues, pretty hyper vigilant, pretty aware of everything around me, and everything looked kind of suspicious every now and then because I had just come from a war zone where if there's a box laying on the sidewalk on the side of the road near the street light, that could be a bomb. And so if I'm in San Antonio, I'm in the car and there's a box sitting for whatever reason on the sidewalk, it would be like, "Hey, get in that other lane, get over there." And it's like, my wife would say, "Well, why? What do you mean?" And it's like, one time I got mad. There was a guy on a street corner with a gas can. And I'm like, why the hell is he there? Why is he there? Why is he standing there with a gas can? He's not doing anything. And it was my lizard brain. Because where I came from the past 5 months, that was something waiting to happen. You're on that and I had to reassimilate my mind, and it didn't take very long. I'm a pretty common sense guy. Like, okay, I know it could happen. There could be a terrorist attack in San Antonio, Texas, near the medical center. Yes, it's possible. Is it likely? No. And so I really diluted my mind to, from the hypersensitivity of something's going to happen. I just looked at it sensibly. It's not likely enough to happen that I should worry about it this much. And so that really helped me, just looking at a situation saying, yeah, anything's possible. I could have a 747 airplane fly into my house right now and kill me. And I could stress about that right now talking to you.
Yeah.
But is it likely? Is it so likely that I should stress and be afraid of that and live in that mental fear? No. And so I'm not giving it attention. Does it expose me to possibilities of demise? Of course it does. But it's not likely. And so I'm not going to give a lot of attention to it. I'm going to instead focus on what I want in life. And ultimately, I'm going to die at some point anyway, unexpectedly. We all are. So I can't avoid that anyway. So I'm just going to focus on my mission, do my best to survive. And if, whenever it happens, it happens. And that's apparently the way it was supposed to happen.
I hope you guys heard that, because like I said, wrapped up in that story and the explanation of that, there's so much powerful stuff there. Learning to, follow your, if you want to, your sensibility, if you will, your reasoning, your sense of reasoning, as to asking those questions. It's very important to ask questions to yourself because it'll guide you out of your pain. That's what happens when we become traumatized. We are in a state where we begin to question what happened, this, that, is, and all these things. As we begin to put all these things together, then we're able to move forward and make decisions. You're there, you're home, you're dealing with all of this stuff, you're making the adjustment, Brian. As you're living day to day, if you will, and as you describe how you're making the mental adjustment. How did you, Brian, begin to settle in, number one, home back in the States, and number two, how did you begin to look at the outside world, the people around you? How were you engaging with them?
Yeah, it was very weird being home. I remember even just getting off the plane in Germany as they were strolling me from the medevac plane to the hospital. I was on the bus and I was looking out the window, the medical bus, and I saw people jogging down the street and just in parking lots at grocery stores and walking in, like people living a normal life. Like nobody here is on guard. You're not going to get rocketed. You're not going to get ambushed. And I would see people walking into, the Cracker Barrel when I got home. They would be going out to breakfast with their families. And I thought, my gosh, like, it's safe here. Like, because I was just so used to being in a war zone. And it was just like, wow, there's this normal, mostly normal, safe society in general where I've lived my whole life, but it's like I forgot in the months I was in war. My mind got so separated from it. And so coming back, I just had to, a big thing I had to realize is that I see the world differently, but a lot of other people don't. And so I can't expect people to understand me or my perspective because they just don't have the lens of perception that I do now. And I'm always open to changing that lens of perception as well, or altering it, or evolving it so it's more productive and better. But I had to realize that nobody's going to be able to relate to me for the most part and be okay with that. And really just thinking, how can I still be of help to people as I learn about myself? Is there any way I can use this perspective that they can't relate to? Maybe I have some sort of insight or an alternate perspective on things that might be helpful to people. And so I'm always looking for things like that, where's my unique perspective on something that maybe someone else going through a battle hasn't thought of. And if I offer that to them, they might see their situation differently and actually find a way out maybe.
I think that's the key, bringing different perspective. And I tell people, perspective is life, how you look at a situation. And I remember my sons, I would tell them, change your perspective and you'll change your destiny. And it is not, it's not as difficult as people think, but it is difficult if you understand what I mean.
Well, you can believe anything bad you want about your situation, but you have the equal power and ability to think good about it. Because either way, you don't know the worst. You don't know that's going to be the absolute worst in 10 days. You don't know it's not going to change for the better in 10 days. So you might as well choose the good one.
Yeah, that's the key right there, Brian. Choosing choice. And when we begin to choose, we began to design. I call us the designers. We now began to redesign or design our life. Before, most of the times, majority of people, Brian, are living on that default programming, if you will. And when we began to make the decision to choose, that's the only way you're going to change your destiny is to choose to change it. And when you are there at that space, the creator that is you begins to emerge. and make all the adjustments. You will say things and people will become attracted to you to pull it because you have just stepped into your self, if you will. As you began to make these adjustments, Brian, and so forth, because I want to start moving towards how did you start getting into the space where you are sitting in front of a meeting and someone pulls you up and say, hey, because I want to get into what you do as well. How did that came about? You told us a little about it on the onset with the young lady. But how did you begin to gravitate, if you will, Brian, towards the space of personal development and telling one story? Because that's what we do in our minds. What Brian has learned is that if he helps you by changing your perspective, you're going to change your story. So how did you begin to walk towards that direction, Brian?
Yeah, I never intended to. I never meant to do this. Just so everybody knows. I never meant to become a speaker. I never meant to go out and talk about my story or do it in the way that I do now, or I have been doing it for over a decade and a half. But I was at the medical center healing still. I'd been there for about 4 or 5 months, and a combat wounded Vietnam veteran came in and spoke to me and about 20 or 30 other guys who had been blown up, shot up, blasted, injured in war. He was telling us about his war injury and what he learned about life, what helped him, and he'd been extremely successful, still is. And he had built multiple very successful businesses through speaking. He'd been married to the same woman for over 50 years, who he married right before he got deployed to Vietnam, and was still married to her. And and that only ended when she died during COVID. But I looked at his life and I thought, this guy is telling a story, and he can't talk about pain without making us laugh hysterically. So he was cracking jokes about it, and we thought that was really cool. Well, him and I, we became friends. We talked afterwards. It was right people, right place, right time. Our divine paths collided. It was supposed to happen, and
absolutely.
And so he basically said, Brian, if you want, I'll show you how to do something with all this. And I thought, okay, well, I'm done in the military. I'm not going to be able to stay in. I'm being medically put out. What is this? What do you mean? And that's when he invited me to his event that I told the story earlier of meeting that young lady. And after meeting her, I didn't know what happened inside me, but something I didn't know was in me came out of me when she told me that she's not going to go home and kill herself tonight, even though she's already tried and failed. She's not going to put a gun in her mouth and pull the trigger. She's not going to drink a bottle of pills. She's not going to hang herself. And I thought, man, all this pain I went through and was still at the moment going through. This was only 6 or 7 months after my injury. I thought, she's not going to kill herself. And I didn't really even have any advice for her. I was just, the fact that she realized she wasn't alone in her suffering in the world and that other people were working through their own things was her inspiration. And that gave me a great sense of meaning in my suffering. And I really want people to hear that. When you're suffering, if you have, if you have a sense of meaning in your suffering, it is not easier, but it is far easier. It's not easy, but it's much easier to endure and get through what you're going through. If you feel like you're either suffering for a cause or you're suffering because you're doing something you believe in, you deeply believe in. And when I met her, I didn't know what happened in that moment for about 7 or 8 years. And then I read a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, Nazi prison camp survivor. He was a Austrian Jew, a psychiatrist, very brilliant, smart, intelligent man. And he said this in his book. What I didn't know how to describe what happened to me in that moment when I met that young lady, he said in one single phrase. And here's the phrase. This was what describes the biggest thing that allowed me to move forward beyond my trauma and in the mental way. He said, when it comes to suffering, he said, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And I found a meaning in it in that moment, and I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And he also had his own definition of despair, because the textbook definition of despair is basically a complete loss of hope. Zero hope, none. Things will never get better. But he had his own definition of despair. He said despair is suffering without meaning. So
Yeah.
if you're somebody who's going through something and you're suffering and you have no sense of meaning, it's like, if you're being persecuted, at least you have a sense of meaning because of who you are or what people group you're a part of. But that's better than just suffering meaninglessly and not knowing why and seeing no light at the end of the tunnel. But one thing I've also realized is sometimes you suffer with meaning just by default of your situation.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also create meaning. We can create meaningful things around our experience to do something with it. Like with my Use Your Story program. That's one way I'm using my story. I'm doing something meaningful, and everything it costs me to do that is worth it, because I believe that other people can experience what I've experienced in sharing their story, because it's extremely redemptive. Sharing your story gives you a redemptive perspective on your suffering, because when you see other people start to get just a little bit healed, a little bit better, that you find out that everything you went through helped them a little bit take their next step when they thought they were hopeless, that really gives a great sense of meaning. And it was also through that I discovered my next mission after getting out of the military. It was to go share my story, but not with the intent to just talk about myself or project my story onto people, obviously, but to use it as a platform and teach the lessons that I learned through my experience that could help other people win the battles they were facing. So basically, helping people win their battles through speaking to them was my next life mission. And you know who doesn't commit suicide? People who have a sense of meaning and a mission in life, because they still have something left to do. And so whatever that is for you, if you're, as you're listening to this, whoever you are, look for how you can find meaning or create meaning in what you've been through or what you're going through. And what can you do with it? I'll tell you, it doesn't take away any of the pain you're going through necessarily. But if you'll go find other people who are fighting a battle and go help them, see how you can help them, there's something very healing about the fact that you're not focusing just on yourself. And when you help other people, it helps heal you. And there's a reciprocal effect. It comes back to you. Other people want to help you. You don't do it with that intent. You do it because you're a good person and you want to help people. But there's something about helping other people, even in spite of the fact you're going through your own thing, that is extremely redemptive. And instead of going into a downward spiral like a lot of people do, I started going into an upward spiral. When I had a sense of meaning, I had a mentor in my life, and I had a mission to live for, I feel like I was bulletproof mentally.
Yeah.
I mean, I started to learn how to joke about the horrible things in my life, because I'm somebody where my coping mechanism is sarcasm and humor. And so I'm joking about myself, and other people were being inspired by that, and they were learning real, actual, tangible lessons they could apply right then in their life to see a difference made in that moment. And what better life I thought could I live? And I still don't know how it could get much better than doing that.
Yeah. That's a powerful, powerful explanation, Brian. I grew up in the church. And I remember reading stories with Jesus, and all he did was tell stories. And his stories that he told changed the world. And so it changed these couple of guys. And again, I mentioned on the onset, Brian, that, and you said it, I told you that I've known millionaires, multimillionaires, and interviewed them. And the story is the same. The money and all that stuff, they were there making all this, and they were not happy. They were not happy at all until they found their assignment, until they found their purpose. When you find your purpose, wherever you find it, you become purposeful.
Yeah.
It changes you on an instant. Go ahead, man.
I want to say too, those people who are, very wealthy and miserable, wealth doesn't make you miserable, just so people know that. But
Nope.
if all you're doing is going and making the money, but you're divorced from a sense of purpose internally, you're separate from it, that's what causes that downfall. Because like I've known people who are super rich and super miserable.
Yep.
But I've also known some who are super rich and super fulfilled in life, and they're going a lot of them going a mile a minute doing their career thing, but they're also involved in causes, or they have side projects or an art thing they do of some sort that they love. It's their outlet, but it's they've found, and if the way they make money isn't the thing that fulfills them,
No.
they at least found the thing in addition to that they do on the side as sort of a release valve that is part of their internal thing that matters to them. And I think, because I grew up in church too, and I think by and large, the consensus on money is that the whole thing is mammon, a spirit of greed and money and love of money, and that's not entirely the case. I mean, if you want to create a society full of poverty, just teach people money's evil, which is the dumbest thing to me in the world. But a lot of people, they grow up and nobody says that. But you can do very well financially. I do better financially than both my parents ever did combined. I'm so fortunate my kids don't have to grow up like they did. But I have purpose tied to what I do. And if it wasn't tied into my living, I would be doing it on the side. Because that's a distinction of what you're talking about. Some of them were rich and miserable. It's because 100% of their time was consuming, making the money. But what they were doing wasn't fulfilling them.
Yeah.
But man, you find that fulfillment. So even if you're listening to this and you're very well off and you're miserable, find something to do on the side. Say, I don't have time on the side. Yes, you do. We make time for what's important. And so, if it's important to not be miserable in spite of having, the amount of money you have, carve out some time, a little bit here and there, every day or two or whatever, or, a few times a week, and find what fulfills you and start doing that, work on that little thing or whatever. Just take the next step. And that's for anybody, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice, because especially when you're working with people and people who can't give you anything in return, it's amazing what that effects does to you. The power of it is much more impactful for you than as much impact you bring to them. But your internal compass begins to change. You begin to look and perceive things differently. So here you are, Brian. You walked into, or your assignment walked into you, if you will.
In a way, yeah.
And Brian said that if you guys were listening again, he said that it took him 8 years later for him to begin to move forward. And remember, I told you this journey of personal development is not for lazy people. If you're lazy, you're not going to want to make it and get to know who you are. It's a journey for committed people. You become a disciple about yourself, disciple in your life, in your training, your mind. One becomes a disciple as he begins to move forward in his life. As you are approaching and you're speaking all over the globe, as they say, all over the United States, how did you transition into the books? Because I know how we are once we start the journey there. We are pregnant, if you will. And as we move through this journey, we begin to exhibit a stomach of this pregnancy, and we got to learn how to deliver this thing. So how did those books started to bubble up in you? And what was the journey like in putting pen to paper and releasing what was stored inside of you?
Yeah, writing is one of those things that is extremely therapeutic, just like speaking. Every time I got up, I got better. Not just at speaking, but in my heart and in my mind, I healed a little bit more. I realized after a while through speaking that when I was speaking on stage, I was only influencing the people who were live at the event. So that could be 20 people, or my couple of largest audiences were around 30,000. So that's a lot of people, or anything in between. Average audience is probably 500 to a couple thousand. But my message doesn't leave that place really tangibly and only the people at the live event got it. So, but here's the thing: my books, they go places, and people get them and read them, and they see them, and they hear my story and hear the lessons I learned that can help them. And it has these books and resources I've created. They have a far broader reach than I'll ever be able to reach if I were only speaking to people in a room live on stage.
Yeah.
The books go places I can't go, and I never will. Like, I'll probably never go to some, tiny town in West Virginia that nobody's ever heard of and speak to people. But you know what? There might be one or two people in that town who went out of town to a conference, and I was the speaker, and they got one of the books, and then they have it there. And lo and behold, one of their friends sees it on their coffee table and is going through something, and they share it, and it's a way to help people more. It's another medium of communicating and using your story. And with that, I had fundraiser things I would do with it. I never wanted to charge the military for the books, but I wanted to distribute them to the military when I spoke and did resilience training on military bases. So I would have people buy them in bulk, and they would pay for the books, and then we'd deliver them to the troops when I spoke for the troops. And one, they got to support the troops and do something, because people want to do something if you'll just tell them what to do. A lot of people want to. They're looking for something. Two, it helped the troops because they got free books, free information from somebody who's just like them, who has fought some battles very similar to their own, and has won some of those battles. And three, it provided financially for my business, because I have to run a business. If you don't run a business, you don't have a business, you can't help anybody. Yeah. Money is the grease on the machine that makes the whole thing operate. Well, that provided financial productivity, funding, so that I could get this thing up and going and reach more people. And so it was a huge way to win for everybody. It's like a three-way win. I'm of the opinion if everybody's not winning, something's wrong. Yeah. A great deal is where everybody wins. And I've been able to do that in a lot of different ways, but it's been fun. It's awesome to see the light bulb come on in people's eyes, and they go, there was one thing you said in that book, or the one thing I heard you say on that podcast that just hit them right where they were at that moment. It connected. I love that, and it helped them.
I think that's the one of the ultimate prizes, Brian. Guys, Brian and I have been talking for about almost an hour. We're going to put all of his links together so that you can access him. It's important that you access him. We're talking about you're not alone here. If you know a friend that is struggling, going through some things, I keep telling people, we buy silly things sometimes. Buy a friend a good book. Brian has several books. Buy a book and give it to a friend to assist that individual to move forward through their pain. We have to learn to become more purposeful, if you will, Brian, in our gifts giving. Let's start doing stuff like that. And I tell people that those words within the pages have the ability to leap from that page straight inside a human being and change their life forever, because several books have done that to me. And once I received, I was able to become more healed, more productive in how I approach myself and others in life. So here you are, Brian. Yeah. Talk to us about one. You on the first onset, you mentioned one of those stories. I like those stories because it is the place where we get an opportunity to witness the transformation from one perspective into another. And when that individual makes that switch, we know that what resides there for them is freedom. Once you get there and you begin to put aside the old programming, the old stories, and input the new data, it changes your trajectory. Invite us, Brian, to one of those precious moments. I call it the holy transitions that we get to witness as an individual. You mentioned one. Can you bring us into another space where we can partake of that?
Yeah. Again, one of my biggest life lessons I've learned through all this, like I said in the beginning, was that our stories have the power to literally transform the world. And having the ability to share your story from a place of value that helps people is one of the absolute most powerful skills you could ever develop. I mean, it literally makes you dangerous, being able to communicate clearly and compelling and concisely. You look at religious leaders, you look at politicians, you know the power of words. If you've seen any social justice movement happen, anything like that, you are deadly if you know how to communicate clearly, and not deadly necessarily in a bad way. You are very powerful is what I mean. And so one thing I'm doing now, over the years, I've had so many people ask me, Brian, how do I do what you do? Like I said, they don't teach this in school. People didn't know you could actually do this or even do it for a living or even a part-time side income while also making a difference in people's lives. Again, I didn't mean to do this. But so what I have right now is if you go to useyourstory.com, I have what's a free resource there for you. It's a free download. It's called the Share Your Story Roadmap. And I'm going to show you exactly how to share your story and make your first $500 speaking. All right. That is so doable and so necessary and so important, because when you understand how to share your story, you'll understand how much power you have in the world and that your story does matter. And you don't have to have an extreme story like me. A lot of people think, well, my story's not like his, or it's not as great, or why would anyone want to hear my story? You know, what's in my story that could help anyone? Everybody in the beginning has all those blind spots. And I'm telling you, sharing your story will not only have the ability to transform our world, it can transform your life. My family tree, literally, not just me, my family tree is transformed because I know how to do this. My kids have a different life than they would because I know how to do this. They have a better life because of it. So if you want to know how to share your story, or you know someone who wants to share their story, just go to useyourstory.com, get that free Share Your Story roadmap. And again, I'm going to show you exactly how to share your story from a position of value that helps people and solves a problem in the world, and also how to make your first $500 doing it.
That's excellent. Guy, we'll also provide that information for you. Brian, I want to thank you, man, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. This has been a good one, man. I'm so glad that you made it because, as I said, I believe that there was a need, and that's why you're here. And someone needed you and probably most likely was in pain. And you manifest, and they manifested you. And so you're here to share with us, and we want to honor you and thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor, Sam.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.